Before I say anything else in this video, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I have been an Andrew Yang supporter since day one, but ever since Yang dropped out of the race, I had been hoping for Bernie Sanders to win the nomination. The one similarity that both of these candidates had in common is a humanity first type of message. Both of these candidates wanted to directly help the American people and solve problems in the country by taking bold action. This is why I think highly of both of them. So once again, to be clear, I do have tremendous admiration for Bernie, and yes, I wanted him to win the Democratic nomination in both 2016 and in 2020. So as I say the things that I'm going to say in this video, remember that I am on your side. And just like you, I am deeply disappointed that Bernie is not the one going head-to-head against Trump this year. With that being said, I want to take some time here and clarify why I disagree with a lot of what's being said lately by people like Crystal Ball, Jimmy Dore, and Kyle Kulinski, and others. I think there's a larger conversation to be had here than what we've been hearing from a lot of these progressive media outlets. And my hope is that by the end of this video, you'll have a deeper understanding as to why voting for Joe Biden is by far the most sensible thing to do in the 2020 general election. In doing so, I also want to address a number of misconceptions floating around on social media and within progressive circles online. The first misconception I've seen is this idea that Bernie didn't make any egregious mistakes when running for president, and that it's entirely the fault of the media that Bernie didn't win the nomination. So, here's the thing. When supporting a candidate for public office, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the candidate is infallible in every way, and that he or she can do no wrong. Obviously, we see Trump supporters talking this way about their hero all the time. But somewhat disappointingly, I've noticed this trend happening among some Bernie Sanders supporters as well. With that being the case, if we're going to be honest in our assessment of the situation, we have to be willing to admit that Bernie Sanders did make some critical mistakes which, in my assessment, cost him not only the nomination in 2020, but also the presidency in 2016. The first and most devastating of these mistakes was to stubbornly describe himself as a democratic socialist. Now, let's be real about this. Disaffected Republicans who can't stand Trump and don't want to vote for Trump and are looking for an alternative to Trump might vote for a centrist candidate such as Joe Biden. But the cold, hard reality of the situation is this. Those disaffected Republicans will never, ever vote for someone who calls himself any version of a socialist, whether we're talking democratic socialist or otherwise. And the other hard truth is this. We are likely going to need those disaffected Republicans on our side if our goal is to see Trump get voted out of office in November. Remember, it was mostly centrist Democrats who flipped the House of Representatives in 2018 from Republican control to Democratic control. This is strong evidence that many people who voted for Trump in 2016 were willing to vote for the Democrats in the midterm, provided that the Democrats were centrist, not democratic socialist. Bernie choosing to call himself a democratic socialist rather than simply a social democrat may go down in history as one of the most egregious, incredulous political miscalculations in American history. Instead of talking about President Sanders running for re-election, we're instead facing a situation where Sanders will never become president at all. To me, that's a depressing thing to think about, but it is, unfortunately, the reality we face. Another mistake that I think Bernie made is he struck a very combative and oftentimes alienating tone when he spoke of certain groups of people. For example, he would often say, "We're going to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry." Now, as soon as he says those words, he's essentially alienating not only those companies themselves, but also all employees of those companies, family members of those employees, as well as anyone who owns stock in those companies. The same can be said for the fossil fuel industry, the private health insurance industry, Wall Street, and anyone in the 1%. If you're in any of those groups, work for any of those companies, or you have a family member or close friend who falls into one of those categories, guess what? Bernie Sanders just made it clear that he has you, or someone you care about, in his crosshairs. A better approach, I think, would be to say, look, we hold no ill will toward our friends in the fossil fuel industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the private health insurance industry, those on Wall Street, or those in the 1%. We do, however, need everyone to realize that in this critical moment in the history of both America and the world, the status quo simply cannot continue. The reasons for this are very overt and require our immediate attention. What we currently have is a system which works extremely well for some while leaving others in the dust and having no regard for their well-being. What we need now is a system that works for all Americans, and at the same time, we must address the looming climate catastrophe which is already beginning to ravage our planet's ecosystems. You see, by wording the messaging more like that, Bernie could have got his points across and conveyed his policy positions without striking a combative tone, a tone of divisiveness and alienation. And let's be honest here, there really was no need for Bernie to call his political campaign a political revolution. It was yet another reason for leery potential voters to be scared away from voting for him. Bernie's third mistake was his absolutist language while talking about his policy proposals. At no point in his campaign did Bernie come across as someone who could be worked with, someone who was willing to compromise on anything. While this tone was music to the ears of his main voter base, it made it exceptionally hard for him to bring new voters into the tent. To be honest, I think it would have improved his chances of winning the nomination if he had not taken a my way or the highway attitude on all of his policy stances, but instead said that, as president, he would work with Congress to endeavor to make those policy proposals a reality. That slight adjustment in messaging, I think, would have helped Bernie appeal to a wider range of Democrats, as well as independents. And based on what I've been hearing from a number of people, the fourth issue with Bernie's campaign has been his body language and physical posture. To some, he comes across as an angry, haughty man who hunches over the lectern and points angrily at people while shouting at them. Evidently, this imagery has had a damaging effect on Bernie's campaign overall. Something as simple as better body language and physical posture could have averted this problem. And let's face it, throughout this process, Bernie simply did not get young voters to the ballot box in the type of numbers that he needed in order to win. The responsibility for that, at least to some extent, does fall on his own shoulders. The second misconception I'm hearing about is this idea that it's time to show the DNC who's boss. We're tired of being pushed around by the DNC. The DNC conspired to prevent Bernie from winning. Well, here's the thing. The thing to remember here is that 2016 and 2020 are separate times and separate situations. That was then, this is now. Was there deliberate impropriety on the part of the DNC back in 2016? Yes, there absolutely was. There was collusion between the DNC and Clinton's campaign to tip the scales in Hillary's favor against Bernie. However, nothing similar to that happened here in 2020. To suggest that there was some sort of conspiracy to screw over Bernie this time around is simply wrong. This brings me to my next point. When Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Michael Bloomberg dropped out of the race and endorsed Biden, it wasn't because there was some sort of conspiracy against Sanders. It was simply due to the realization that Bernie was massively benefiting from the large number of candidates in the race, and that he was going to win the nomination if multiple centrist candidates continue to split the centrist vote. On their part, it was a wise move to consolidate the centrist vote behind one candidate. Since then, the race had become squarely a two-horse race, Biden, the centrist, versus Sanders, the progressive. The results of the primaries since then have mostly gone in Biden's favor, and all polls of remaining states had overwhelmingly shown that Joe had a clear path to the nomination from then on out. Simply put, the voter has spoken. The reason why Bernie won't become the nominee is not anything the DNC did or didn't do. The reason is that there are many more voters who chose Joe to be the nominee than there were voters who chose Bernie to be the nominee. Nothing more, nothing less. That being said, there is one legitimate grievance here that is, yes, admittedly, that the media coverage has been somewhat unfair toward Bernie throughout this process. It was. But here's the thing that we all need to remember about the situation. Refusing to vote for Biden will not, in any way, shape, or form, cause the media to be fair and unbiased in their coverage next time around. Let's not forget, many Democrats protested in 2016. They either voted for Trump third party or didn't vote at all. So the question is, did it work? Did that course of action, did that plan ultimately work? Well, according to most of what I've been hearing lately, the general consensus out there seems to be that the media is still as unfair and corrupt as ever. So then, I guess your plan to arm twist the media didn't work out as you hoped it might. Meanwhile, what has Trump done? Besides spending these last 4 years turning the country into a banana republic, running roughshod over the Constitution, undermining the rule of law, weakening the separation of powers of the federal government, damaging America's alliances, expanding the already bloated military-industrial complex, stacking the courts full of authoritarians, misogynists, bigots, and anti-science zealots. So ask yourself, was it worth it? Was it really, honestly worth it? Is this what progressivism is really all about? Empowering a crazed madman, a malignant narcissist, a wannabe dictator who's clearly drunk with power? Putting a man back in the Oval Office for 4 more years? And for what? For what? To settle a beef with the media? Well, I've got some unfortunate news for you. If anything, the media wants 4 more years of Trump. Because, let's face it, he's a ratings boon for them. And if Trump wins re-election, they win. Don't let them win. Misconception number 3. I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils because it prevents change from ever coming about. Look, Joe Biden may have his flaws, and yes, he has a spotty voting record. However, there is already evidence that he's further left than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. Bernie Sanders has, in fact, successfully moved the party to the left of what it previously was. And to be honest, that's how progress happens in politics. It's not always about getting the ideal candidate elected. It's about how much political landscape shifts due to grassroots campaigns. And then, in turn, the politicians ultimately have to listen to the will of the people. Case in point, Hillary was once anti-gay marriage, but changed her position as the years went on. Another extremely pertinent example, which illustrates this point beautifully, I think, is the fact that Nancy Pelosi, just 1 year ago, mocked the Green New Deal by calling it the Green Dream. She just outright mocked it. But as of today, Joe Biden is openly embracing the principles of the Green New Deal, as clearly outlined on his campaign website. So imagine that. The centrist establishment wing of the Democratic Party came around on the Green New Deal in just 1 calendar year. It's a powerful reminder of the type of change that primary grassroots campaigns can and ultimately do bring about. As progressives, we should all be proud of the influence that our candidates and our campaigns have brought to mainstream politics. There is, however, one important caveat to keep in mind. In order for positive change to come about, the elected officials that we are trying to sway cannot be so overtly contemptuous and resentful toward the concept of democracy itself that they completely and utterly ignore the will of the people. This, my friends, is precisely why Donald Trump must not be elected to a second term. Misconception number 4, Joe Biden is evil. And there's not much difference between Trump and Biden. I strongly disagree with this notion of Joe Biden being evil. What I think is important to note here is that having a checkered past is not the same thing as being evil. Is Joe Biden's checkered past a problem? Well, to some extent, sure, you could argue that it is. But let's be honest here. What a person has done many, many years in the past is far less pertinent than what the person has done in recent years and what the person plans to do in upcoming years. In that regard, I do think it's important to highlight key differences between the two candidates. On climate change, Joe Biden will embrace the principles of the Green New Deal and, among other things, will re-enter America into the Paris Climate Accord. Donald Trump thinks climate change is a Chinese hoax. On women's rights, Joe Biden will support Planned Parenthood and appoint only Supreme Court nominees who will protect Roe v. Wade. With Donald Trump, you can say goodbye to Planned Parenthood and Roe v. Wade. That's right, kiss them goodbye. On immigration, Joe Biden will restore DACA and will create a roadmap to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants who are currently living in the shadows. Trump will do neither of these things. On healthcare, Joe Biden will look to improve upon Obamacare to bring down costs while making sure that every American has access to affordable care. Trump will return America to the days of George W. Bush, where if you suffer a medical emergency and you're not wealthy, you're basically screwed. On gun safety, Joe Biden will pass common sense gun legislation, such as requiring background checks and banning assault weapons. Donald Trump will continue bowing his head to the NRA. On wealth inequality, Joe Biden will work to strengthen unions and make it easier for workers to join unions. Donald Trump will not. On seniors' care, Joe Biden will protect and strengthen Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Trump's budget proposals have repeatedly called for and continue to call for rampant cuts to these programs. On race relations, Trump has shown blatant contempt to communities of color. Biden will work to repair and enhance race relations in America. On international trade, Trump has sparked costly, disastrous trade wars that have ravaged many American farmers. Biden will avoid such trade wars and will seek to strengthen international trade relationships with countries around the world. On international affairs, Trump has done everything he can to undermine and weaken NATO while cozying up to autocrats like Putin, bin Salman, Bolsonaro, Kim Jong-un, and Erdogan. Furthermore, he has sparked international chaos by ripping up the Iran nuclear deal and then using direct military force to provoke a war with Iran. Biden will look to repair the damage to American alliances, seek diplomatic means of ensuring that Iran does not obtain nuclear weapons, and make it clear that the type of autocratic governance seen in countries like Russia should never, ever be tolerated in America. On the rule of law, Trump has shown blatant autocratic tendencies and has done all he can to undermine the system of checks and balances in the federal government, has transformed government agencies into rampantly partisan entities, has made it clear that he will use government declarations to do anything he wants whenever Congress won't fall in line. Furthermore, he has described both the Mueller report and impeachment as hoaxes and witch hunts, while describing his call with Zelensky as a perfect call. Biden will restore sanity to the White House, respect the Constitution, and uphold the rule of law. So then, are you really going to tell me that there's not that much difference between Trump and Biden? Really? Misconception number 5. There's nothing wrong with voting one's conscience and voting on principle no matter what. The argument that some people have been making is that because they don't like Joe Biden and they don't want to vote for Joe Biden, that it therefore means that there's nothing wrong with voting for either third party or not voting at all. The problem with that argument is that it ignores one very simple yet sobering fact. As a progressive, to vote for third party or not to vote at all is to help Donald Trump get reelected. Some simple math from 2016 illustrates this point very clearly. In Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, if the people who had voted for Jill Stein had instead voted for Hillary Clinton, guess what? Clinton would have won those states and Donald Trump would have been denied the presidency. Furthermore, if voter turnout had been better for Clinton overall, it's plausible that she may have defeated Trump in even more states. So the situation in 2020 is simply this. There are only two candidates who have any mathematical chance of winning: Donald Trump and Joe Biden. If you vote for anyone other than Joe Biden, or you don't vote at all, you are actively helping Trump secure a second term. That's just an objective, mathematical, verifiable reality. Any vote not going to Joe brings Trump one vote closer to a second term. That's just how it is, sadly. Ranked choice voting, it should be the system that's in place, but until then, we got to deal with the system as it is right now. We have to vote for Joe. All right. Misconception number 6. A third-party candidate can win. The short here answer is no. A third-party candidate cannot win the presidency. The electoral system in the U.S. is set up in such a way that it makes it logistically impossible for a third-party candidate to win. Third-party candidates to win. To no one's surprise, no candidate outside of the two major parties has ever won the White House. Literally ever. However, it has never been from a lack of trying. Case in point, look at Ross Perot in 1992 and 1996, where, despite huge media and ad buys, along with grassroots support and strong debate performances, he had all of that going for him. Guess what? His campaign failed to win a single state. Didn't even win a single state despite having all that going for him, let alone capture even 20% of the national vote. Not even that, not even 20% of the national vote. Think about that. Misconception number 7. My vote is an expression of power. Falling in line with Joe Biden means giving up that power. While it may feel good to think that your vote is a way of exerting some power over the political process, the reality is that your individual vote, just by itself, is neither a mechanism of power, nor does it give you any real sway over the political process. However, your vote can have an effect when it is cast collectively, together with the votes of others as part of a feasible, well-thought-out political strategy. In other words, if you give your vote to a third party in this system, your vote is essentially wasted. However, if you give your vote to a candidate who actually has a real mathematical chance of winning, you're actually putting your vote to good effect. Simply put, your vote is not a mechanism of power, but rather, it is a mechanism of opportunity. If you have an opportunity to use your vote in a way that makes a real, measurable, tangible, positive difference in your country, will you choose to make the most of that opportunity? Or will you choose to throw it away? Misconception number 8. Things have to get worse before they'll get better. Here's the problem with that line of thinking. This election is not one where America can afford to mess around with the possibility of re-electing this demagogue-in-chief. Trump has already caused enormous harm, but things will get exponentially worse if he gets another 4 years. The Supreme Court and all other courts are chock full of Trump appointees, but this trend will only accelerate if Trump gets another term. If he does, he will turn the U.S. into a total banana republic, with authoritarians, misogynists, bigots, and ruthless barbarians in complete control of every aspect of the country. If you really think that a second Trump term won't be that bad, it's because you have no idea how bad things could really get. At least with Biden, the bleeding can be stopped and the process of turning the country around can begin. Don't try to pretend that Trump isn't many, many times worse than Biden. Anyone who hasn't been living under a rock for the past 4 years knows that he absolutely is. Look, I know that this is a difficult time. Bernie Sanders isn't going to become the nominee, and you're frustrated, and rightfully so. You're hurting right now, and I understand your pain because, to some extent, I feel it too. I want to see the world move in a progressive direction, and let's be honest, there's no time to lose. But we have to remember that in order to fight for a better future for humanity, we have to make sure that there is a future to fight for. That means not allowing a crazed tyrant to drive the country and humanity off a cliff completely. I truly believe that in this critical time, what it means to be a progressive is to understand the urgency and gravity of the situation and to act accordingly. So, as hard as it may be to contemplate, let alone actually do, I sincerely ask you to, for just one final time, please do what is sensible in this critical, pivotal, defining moment in the history of humanity. Please vote for the Democrat. Please vote for Joe Biden. After 2020, sure, at that time, all bets will be off. And it'll be time for either the DNC to fall in line with the will of the people or pay the price. Yes, it may be necessary to use the threat of a 2024 primary challenge to keep President Biden accountable. But until then, please save America, and for that matter, the world, from the brink of the abyss. Please vote to remove Donald Trump from office. Please vote for Joe Biden. Thank you.